Well, hi there, and hello, and welcome to the Pitch Grid Podcast, the podcast that covers news, analysis, and insight from the football world, both the NFL and the world of soccer. And today, folks, we have a very special guest with us today, and that is Nate Bukaty. He is a play-by-play announcer for Apple TV and their coverage of MLS. He is also a author, and also he used to call games for Sporting Kansas City as well, and also the co-host of the Heart and Goal podcast. Nate, thank you so much for coming on the show. We are so honored to have you on, man.
It's an honor to be on the show. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no problem. This is a huge thing. I grew up listening to Sporting KC, and hearing your calls was awesome. So, Nate, I grew up a huge Sporting fan, as I just said. You got to call some huge moments in club history. I know you didn't officially call the MLS Cup runs, but what sticks out as some of the biggest moments in your time calling Sporting KC games?
Yeah, I was a season ticket holder when Sporting Kansas City won MLS Cup back in 2013. So I was in the cauldron for that game. But when it comes to my time on the job, I would say that the biggest memory I have was the run in 2017 to the U.S. Open Cup final. I got to call a couple of U.S. Open Cup finals for Sporting Kansas City, but that one in particular was special because that was the year that Neil Patterson tragically passed away from cancer just a couple of days before the quarterfinal match against FC Dallas. So that game to me is one that will always be etched in my memory. That's why for a lot of people that don't know their history, when you look on the wall at Sporting Park and you see that 2017, the letters or the numbers are in orange, that's in honor of Neil Patterson, who was the Oklahoma State Cowboy, and those were his favorite colors. And they did that in honor of him. So to me, that was probably the biggest moment for me as an announcer for Sporting Kansas City.
Oh, I remember that run. That was so special, and even though it was under tragic circumstances, that was an incredible run. It gave me absolute chills to see us hoist that cup after a great run, and honor Neil in that way for sure. So on that, who were some of your favorite players to cover the years? I know we've had some great ones. Of course, Zusi, who you just had on your podcast, or Shalvey, or was it Busio maybe, or Amelia, or Russell, or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, that's that's like picking your favorite Beatles song, man. There's so many great guys, so many great players, but also just great people. Graham Zusi, Matt Beasler, Benny Failhaber, Roger Espinoza, who we're all doing this Heart and Goal podcast with, are all we're wonderful players, but also just really top-notch human beings. I put Peter Vermes and Kerry Zavagnin in that category. And yeah, guys like Daniel Shalvey and Johnny Russell and Seth Sinovic, Tim Melia. It's really hard, honestly, to pick, one guy or even a couple guys because we're really blessed with so many really. And one guy I got to throw out, I actually just got a chance to have coffee with him this past weekend when I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, is Elie Sanchez.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, he became, almost like a family member. He used to come to my son's soccer practices with his dad when he was playing in Kansas City.
That is so cool.
Yeah, so he's another one of those guys I have to put at the top of that list.
Yeah, I can imagine like Ike Opara, for example. He was one of my favorites.
Yeah, absolutely. Ike lives in town still. Wonderful guy. Maybe one of the funniest guys, just an absolute wonderful sense of humor. Great guy. Love Ike. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, man, that is so cool. I remember, I barely can remember the MLS Cup run in 2013, but man, Seth Sinovic is such a throwback. I haven't heard that name in years, but man, I loved watching him play, and the service he did for the club was incredible. Nowadays, Nate, Sporting has been going through quite the rough patch despite its rich, incredible history, finishing at or right near the bottom of the West the last few years. They just had a huge change letting Vermes go last season. One of the iconic managers, not just in MLS but in American soccer. What would you say is the impact and legacy now that we've had a year to chew on it a bit of Peter Vermes, not only at Sporting but American soccer in general.
I think he's one of the most important figures in the history of American soccer. I don't really think there's much of a debate about that. The sport isn't what it is in Kansas City without him, and it's not what it is around the country without him. You know, the foresight, the vision, the competitive nature that he had for the game. I'll just tell you a personal story. I tell this story a lot, so you or your listeners might have heard it before, but I went from being a Sporting Kansas City fan to their commentator, which was a big leap for me because I had not done a lot of soccer up until that point. And he really took an active interest in helping educate me on the game because
Wow.
he felt that it was he told me, he said, your job's really important because we need to help educate the audience because the average American doesn't really know the game of soccer that well. They,
For
they haven't
sure.
been taught the game. And the only way you can teach the game as a broadcaster is if you understand it yourself. And so you really need to make it a priority to learn the game. And he was very, very helpful in that regard. Always had time for me for a conversation, sometimes over a beer, sometimes, a training, whatever the case might be. He never big timed me or anything like that. And he really took an active interest in trying to help me learn. And, so that I think that's the way he treated everybody. And I think he did it because he knew he needed to grow the fan base here in Kansas City. And in the country, they needed to grow the fan base of soccer. And so
Right.
I think he's a guy that didn't just care. He wasn't just focused. Yeah, he wanted to win. Obviously, very competitive guy, but it wasn't just about that for him. It was about trying to grow something special in the United States. And, I think because of that, he really helped. He really helped make Kansas City, what we call now the soccer capital of America.
Oh, absolutely, and yeah, I couldn't agree more. Really quick sidetrack here. So I know he did he. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he played on that team that beat Man United in the friendly, right, at Arrowhead.
He
Um,
coached that team.
that's right.
Yeah, he was the coach of that team. Now, a couple of other star defenders. Here's your history for that one. Um, that was one of the biggest moments in club history. And a
Absolutely.
couple of the star players who featured in that game at the position that Peter used to play of center defense, Jimmy Conrad started that game and got a red card for
Wow.
denial of a goal scoring opportunity. And the guy that replaced him was a young Matt Beasler
Oh
when
goodness.
when they had to bring in another defender. So
Uh,
Sporting, won that game down a man. Kai Kamara scored the game-winning goal. But yeah, it was Jimmy Conrad, former national team guy, who was towards the end of his time in Kansas City, and the guy that he would pass the baton on to, Matt Beasler, came in for him in
yeah,
that game.
that's so cool. Jimmy Conrad's such a throwback too. Like I love watching his highlights and like Beasler, of course, is a native son of KC, of course, and man, that were you at that game? Can you describe that atmosphere
I
if you
was.
were?
Yeah, I was wearing a Celtic jersey of all things at that time, and that was my squad. And I hadn't fully caught the Wizards bug at that point. Rob Thompson, the longtime PR guru for Sporting Kansas City and the Wizards, going back to the very beginning, he always likes to compare that to the movie Rocky Four. When Rocky took on Ivan Drago and the
Right,
Russians all were cheering against him at the beginning of the fight, but by the end, the underdog Rocky had won them all over, right?
right,
Because most of the people that were in the stands that day were there to see Manchester United. Kind of like how nowadays people go to a game to watch Lionel Messi play, even against their own team.
right.
They were there to see Manchester United play. They were the biggest powerhouse in world soccer at the time, and because of the scrappy effort by the Wizards and playing down a man and everything, by the end of it, they had won over the crowd, and that was right before the rebrand happened, and
Right.
it really launched the team into the rebrand. It gave them all sorts of momentum and attention. That was one of the most important moments in club history.
Oh, I can imagine. It got us out of Community America and into Children's Mercy Park, which is of course an incredible atmosphere, which I hope to be at someday because I'd love to be in the Blue Hell sometime. but switching back to the more bigger picture of the club in general nowadays, um, we just saw, of course, like we just talked about the change of Vermes leaving Sporting and the front office getting cleared out. We had new GM come in. Ralph Wiki has come in as the new head coach. As a Borough fan, this is kind of funny because we were interested in hiring Ralph Wiki when we replaced Rob Edwards when he left for Wolves. So it's kind of a funny connection there for me seeing Ralph Wiki go
Hmm.
to my other club.
Hmm.
And of course, you were just there a couple of weeks ago when Sporting drew with Columbus, called the game, all that. What were your impressions around the club and Wiki himself?
I'll actually start with what you mentioned first, because remember when they had to replace Peter Vermes, they didn't just have to replace a head coach; they had to replace their director of soccer operations,
Right.
basically. Um, and that's David Lee now. And I think that's where it starts. He's the one that made the hire of Rafa Vicky. And I actually had a chance to meet with David last week for coffee and, talk to him a lot about the vision he has for the club, where he sees things headed. And I think the club's in very, very capable hands with David Lee. I think he is, for one thing, he's not a rash person. I know there's some frustration right now amongst the fans because they haven't gone out and made as many big name signings as you would want right off the bat.
Yeah.
Their roster is not anywhere near complete right now, although some more names keep popping up of guys they're bringing in. But I think that's actually very important because I think he's being prudent with the decisions he's making and smart with the money that he's got to spend. And you want to make decisions that are smart for the long term. You don't want to get yourself caught in a bad salary cap situation, which is what they frankly were in
Right.
coming into this season. So I think David Lee is really doing a lot to first turn around the culture of the club again, back into the right direction, the way it was when Peter Vermes had things rolling. And I think Rafa Vicky has brought in there's just a more robust coaching staff now. They've got more staff. They were really doing things bare bones here at the last couple of years. And so I think you can see a direction. I think you can see that they have a mindset and an idea of how they want to play. And now it's just a matter of putting that full roster together. And I think you're going to see this team return to competitiveness actually sooner than a lot of people think.
I kind of agree because like during that game, it just seemed to signal that something could be changing compared to the last couple of seasons, where, especially last season, that just felt so flat and uninspiring. And yet there were some
Hmm.
huge positives, like of course, Dayon staying here, staying in Sporting, scoring the brace. There was some fight back actually against the Columbus side that isn't what it was a couple of years ago when it won the cup, but it's still a really good side. Do you think that, despite the early doors, that that's a correct assumption, or like what do you see that could really be a
Yeah.
signal we are changing the corner here as a franchise?
I thought this last match, even though it was a loss against San Diego, was another indication because, I think that Stephen Afrifa's shot there at the end of the game goes in. They have a chance to get a result in that game. And
Right.
a San Diego team that was one of the best teams in the Western Conference last year, they're off to a great start this year. And again, with a team that doesn't have its full roster and a whole bunch of young guys out there, they were competitive because they stuck to their game plan and they maintained discipline to a certain extent, and they fought hard the entire way, all the way to the end. So I actually think you're seeing some encouraging signs considering what the roster is right now versus where they want it to be. I
Right.
think there's some real positives there. So yeah, I think I'm seeing good signs.
What are your thoughts on Jake Davis? Because I know like Jake
Go ahead.
I know Jake is kind of like he used to be one of our best players, and nowadays some fans I know are seeing him kind of petering out and think that he doesn't need to be around the club as much. Is it? Do you think it's just he's out of position, or what's kind of been the you think is he declining at all, or is it just kind of fan bias or frustration?
Well, look, I'm going to admit a bias because I remember the day that I met Jake Davis when he was a 16-year-old, and that was because it was a preseason, and I was just there working, watching training, and this young kid. I mean, he looked like, and I say this as a guy who looked very young for my age when I was that age, but he had this baby face. Um, he looked like a little kid. He was 16 years old, and he came across the field and introduced himself to me. Hi, my name's Jake Davis. I'm one of the academy players.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, well, that's impressive. Usually you don't see that from a 16-year-old. And ever since then, I've always been impressed by his maturity and his competitiveness. You have to
Absolutely.
remember what the kid's been through. You know, he coming up in a system that wasn't exactly developing a lot of young talent at the time. That was kind of headed in the wrong direction for the last few years. Moved around from position to position. I think he's been through a lot at an early age, and I think that you ought to just look at it this way: this regime has decided to keep him around and put him at the center of a lot of what they do.
That's true.
So that tells you that that's what they think of him, not just the last regime. They didn't draft this guy. They didn't bring him up through their system. They inherited him, and they still see him that way. I think that's all the endorsement you should need.
Absolutely. I agree. Him and Busio have been like the more memorable academy prospects recently for Sporting. And man, I just hope Davis doesn't leave anytime soon because I love that guy to bits. Um, so let's pivot from Sporting to MLS in general. What have you made the league so far this season, man? Uh,
Well, I think it's going to be really competitive again. I mean, that's one of the things we know about this league is that first of all, it's full of surprises. So I would say that's one thing to keep in mind when you're talking about Sporting Kansas City, by the way, and
mm-hmm.
everybody's picking them to finish in the bottom of the league. A lot of times that everybody thinks they know something, they don't turn out to be right. One thing to remember about the league this year is that the summer transfer window comes after the World Cup pause, which means there's going to be a lot of time, actually 20 games on the schedule after the summer transfer window, which is usually the opposite. There's only like 9 to 10 games or so.
Right.
So there's a lot of business to be done. I think there's going to be a lot that we think we know early in the season that could totally change after teams make additions in the summertime during that transfer window. And Sporting, they've got money to spend. They've got the most allocation money available to them in Major League Soccer right now. So, I think it's going to be a really interesting and competitive season across the board.
Absolutely. Do you feel like with the names of like Son Heung-min coming in, Messi of course has been here for a few years, Rodriguez, Werner, Mueller, do you think the league is actually like growing and gaining prestige in world soccer, or is it just? I know a lot of like European fans are like MLS, but like, do you think it actually is gaining prestige in world soccer like as a whole?
I think it's growing, and I think it's got a long way to go, all at the same time. I think both things can be true at the same time. I think more and
Mm-hmm.
more players that come over here gain respect for the quality and the level of play. But I also think that the majority of people still kind of look down their nose at Major League Soccer until they experience it themselves.
Right.
So, I think both things are kind of true. And it really just comes down to the league just needs to keep adding.
Yeah.
It needs to keep adding players like Son and Mueller and Messi. They will. And I think that this World Cup's going to be a perfect opportunity to see some of that as well.
Yeah, that's a very true point too. So with the season in full swing now, what are some clubs our listeners should keep an eye on that aren't the typical, your Inter Miami's, your LAFC's, even San Diego, who's kind of already come on LAFC type start to their MLS um, start. What are some
Yeah.
clubs that you think are ones that people wouldn't normally talk about that are going to be
So
interesting?
the team that I've been circling this year is Nashville.
Yeah.
They made a really deft move by signing the free agent Christian Espinoza, who is the all-time assist leader in San Jose history. San Jose, they just have kind of been off the radar the last several years. And so Espinoza doesn't get the kind of credit that he would if he had been at a club that had a lot more success over the last several years. I think he's the perfect addition to Nashville with guys like Surridge and Mukhtar, who are two real, superstar type players, but they've needed somebody that could really be a creative presence and provide service to them. And I think we're already seeing the way they've started the season that Espinoza was a great addition. So that's a team that I would tell everybody to look out for this year for sure. I think Another team to look out for in the West right now is Real Salt Lake when it comes to young talent. They've
Yes.
got some teenagers that are really, Gozo is to me, one of the top young talents in all of Major League Soccer and American soccer. So they're a team to watch out for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was gonna just ask you about that. Like, are there players like Gozo that are like, because he's gonna be one of the up and coming, probably even U.S. men's national team players. I would think, and like
Yeah.
I know you talked on your walk that you posted the other day about Owen Wolf, even though he's battling
Yep.
through injury. Um, so are there other players like Gozo and Wolf? Real Salt Lake, by the way, just seems to stack young talent like Luna and then Gozo. But any other players like that
Hmm.
you think are in the league we ought to keep an eye on?
There's guys all over the place, honestly. And that's one of the things I think is most exciting about the league right now is you're seeing young players come in here. The coaches aren't afraid to play them. They're not intimidated of the situation. Julian Hall has already scored, 3 goals this year. So to me, like some of the guys that I'm trying to think right off the top of my head, you take a look at New York Red Bulls, for example, right? This is a side that has they're having a tough one today. But if
Mm-hmm.
you look at some of the young players that they've had, this midfielder Audrey Mehmeti,
Mm.
16 years old, playing for New York Red Bull, really really good player. And Julian Hall, as I mentioned, already has 3 goals on the season. When you take a look, we were talking about RSL, and of course, I mentioned Gozo, but Herzakani is another player who is doing big things already this year. He scored a wonder goal, 18 years old, Aiden Herzakani from
Mm-hmm.
RSL. Those are a couple guys to keep an eye on. There's a defender for San Diego that you guys would have seen yesterday, or you've seen, when Sporting played against him, and
Mm-hmm.
Manu Dua. He's 20 years old. He's a converted center back. I think he's ticketed for a major club in Europe in the very near future. So, there's and there's a slew of good young players. I'm just trying to name some that are coming off the top of my head right now.
For
But
sure.
I think a lot of reasons to be excited about, the young talent in Major League Soccer right now.
Absolutely. Here on the show, we love EFL Championship. Like I said, I'm a Middlesbrough supporter. And
Hmm.
we've been seeing lots of great MLS talent leave for the EFL Championship, like Aiden Morris, Adelson Malanda, of course, both Borough players, Ajamong, Wagner, Ahmed. Ahmed has had a great start at Norwich, and have had great success in the championship. And vice versa, we've seen like the likes of Latte Loth and Crooks have somewhat struggled at times coming into MLS. Why do you think that is necessarily, Nate? It seems kind of bizarre that you go from MLS and succeed in the championship, and then the reverse seems to be weird.
Because the championship is not a step up in competition
How
from Major
so?
League Soccer. Well, I think you just said it yourself. When you see players in Major League Soccer that are good, solid players, they go to the championship. There's no adjustment period. They
Mm-hmm.
hit the ground running and they're good right away. The challenge in the championship is the fact that you have to play all these games in a short period of time, and that the games are so physical.
Mm-hmm.
That's the challenge. That's the challenge. It's the grind of it. It's not the quality of play. The quality of play is not higher in the championship. And I'm not just using that as my opinion. Dean Smith, the head coach at Charlotte, is an English guy who's spent a lot of time in the championship. And when he
Right.
lost Patrick Ajiman over to Europe in the championship, he said this isn't a step up for him.
Mm.
It's not going to be better soccer there than it is what he's playing here in Charlotte. And he was very upset and sad to lose him. And
Right.
so, I pay attention to that, and I think
Mm-hmm.
we have everybody has it. I think they have it in Europe, but I think even in American soccer, we have almost an inherent bias against our own league, where we think if you're in Europe, you must be a great league.
Right.
You must be a great player. There's
Yeah.
good soccer in the championship, but it is not a step up for Major League Soccer.
I can see that, especially considering how the season and the championship has panned out, particularly. considering this might be one of the lower point totals for a winner of the championship in quite some time, actually. Do you foresee any like MLS players making that similar jump, like Malanda and company, that could maybe make that jump? And if so, do you think they can actually succeed, or is it um, something that might take a while?
I think the bigger question is how many guys can make a jump to a bigger league.
That's true.
We're talking
Yeah.
about the top five leagues, or one of those leagues right outside of the top five, like the Eredivisie. That's usually for the top Americans. You're going to end up going to a place like the Eredivisie. You might be going to Belgium,
Mm-hmm.
maybe Scotland if you're going to play for one of the big clubs in Scotland. If you can prove it there, then you got a chance to go to the Premier League, right?
Right.
And so I think a lot of times that's where these guys end up going. The Bundesliga has taken a lot of fancy of American players lately. So has Italian Serie A. There's a lot of Americans in Serie A right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're going to see a lot of these guys end up in those leagues.
Yeah, that would be fascinating, and especially considering, like we just talked about, the talent that is cropping up in MLS right now. So I wanted to switch a little bit to World Cup talk now, and you wrote in a book called Perfect Pitch with Rustin Dodd, and Matt Beasler apparently wrote the forward I saw. And
Yeah.
so go into detail about the book a little bit before we go into Kansas City as a host.
Yeah. I came up with this idea to write this book back in early April of last year. I was just trying to think about ways I could get involved with the World Cup, ways I could contribute to the cause for
Mm,
Kansas City. And I just thought to myself, there's going to be supposedly hundreds of thousands of international and national tourists coming through Kansas City next year for the World Cup. And most of them don't really know anything about Kansas City. So why not write a book and help them learn? Because it is a city with an incredibly unique and rich soccer story. It's a
right.
young history. It's not an old history, but that's kind of the story of America. And it's a story of innovation, of triumph, of improbability. It's an underdog story. It's a truly great underdog story. And
Absolutely.
and I think people want to hear that, when they're going to visit a place that they've never been to before. So that was the impetus of the book, and that's what I tried to get across in the book.
Oh, that's so cool, man. I'm really looking forward to that. So we know KC is going to be really busy with this upcoming World Cup, and they've had several nations call that decided to make it their home. Argentina, Netherlands, Algeria is going to be in Lawrence even. Um, what have you heard about what specifically drew them to the KC area specifically?
The same thing that made Kansas City a good fit for FIFA when it came to putting World Cup games here. And the same thing that's always been the most important thing and special thing about Kansas City. And it's the thing you see all over town, which is that heart logo, the
Right.
Heart KC. This town, its superpower is its civic pride and its heart. People here
Absolutely.
care deeply about the city. They care about what the city represents. And they want to prove constantly that this city is worthy of consideration because most people in Kansas City know, like I said earlier, that the rest of the world doesn't really concern itself too much with Kansas City.
Right.
If they do think about it, they have misconceptions about how simple of a place it is. And it's actually one of the most complicated places in the world. And it's a fascinating place. And it's a place with incredible history and innovation. So, I think, and here's what, going back to that heart part of the equation, this city wanted it more. When these
Right.
when these when these national teams came to town and had questions, the answer here was always, yeah, we can find a way to make that work because they wanted it.
Right.
And that's the short answer to the question. There's other things that matter. Location's huge.
Mhm.
All these national teams love the fact that it's right in the middle of the country, so they never have too far of a trip that they need to take to get to where their games are going to be. That was a big attractive point. They like the fact that it's kind of off the beaten path. They don't want their players, they're here to win a World Cup. They're not here to party, the
Right.
teams themselves. So they like the fact that there's less distractions in Kansas City than in a place like New York or Miami. And then the facilities are top notch. So you put all
Absolutely.
those things together, it's a perfect place.
Oh, that's really cool and really insightful as well, considering like I know I haven't lived in the Kansas City area in a while, but I grew up around there, and I know as a Chiefs fan, as a Royals fan, and I'm really passionate about the city and its sports, and I know all of us diehards truly are. How has this impacted the area, and what do people in the city think about this in general, having all this attention, all the whole soccer world is going to be convening on KC in less than 100 days?
Well, I think that it's interesting. The majority of the city still doesn't seem to quite get it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just think they don't really know what's coming. And the truth is that the majority of the city is still, not populated by soccer fans. We have a robust soccer community in Kansas City.
Right.
And that soccer community is as passionate and dedicated as any, in the country. But the majority of the city, they still haven't really come around to soccer. And so what I hear from a lot of people when I talk to them, and I try to give them, pep talks about why they should be so excited about this World Cup and how much we as a city have to offer in this World Cup. And a lot of times they say, man, I'm not really a soccer fan, but now you got me excited. Now I'm fired up. So
Right.
we got to keep spreading that word, and getting people excited for this, because it's going to be here before we know it, and it's going to be unlike anything the city's ever experienced before. So, I am seeing more and more. I'm getting, more and more invites to come speak at different, gatherings and events. And I think that's only going to, continue to accelerate over the next, 100 days or so.
Absolutely, and I'm hoping that this can also help that because KC is such an incredible city. The people are incredible. The environment is just incredible, and I'm really hoping that this makes it an incredible atmosphere for all the games and that are coming up in the city. And I'm so excited to see all that pan out. So let's pivot to the U.S. team real quick here. USMNT obviously automatically qualified for the World Cup because they are hosting. What would you say are reasonable expectations for the team, and what are some players to keep an eye on as we get ready to see them compete?
Well, I think reasonable expectations. They got to get out of the group. That's
Right.
the biggest thing. There's no excuse to not get out of the group. They've got more than enough talent. The format makes it a lot easier because now 8 of the 12 groups, top 3 teams will advance. You don't even necessarily have to finish in the top 2 in your group to advance. But
Right.
I think that the ceiling of this team is quarterfinals and possibly, if everything broke the right way, semifinals. They
Wow.
have enough talent. I'm not predicting that's where they're going to make it. But when you
Hmm.
talk about a ceiling, I think you got to dream big. And these players, this is a World Cup team that's going to be filled with players who are playing against the best players in the world on a consistent basis. They're playing in the Champions League. They're playing in the Big 5 leagues in Europe. They're not going to be intimidated to these players the way maybe U.S. players would have been in the past. The biggest thing is they've got to get that American spirit and fight back in them the way those older school teams did. And I think that's going to happen when they're playing for their country on home soil. I think we're going to see the best out of this team. So I actually really think they're capable of doing something special.
Oh, that's really cool. Is there any like sleeper players that we aren't like already aware of? Like your typical
Mm.
Pulisiches, your Weahs, or the guys that are already starting and kind of the headline guys. Obviously, I'm hoping Aiden Morris makes some breakthrough in some way because I think he's been immense for Middlesbrough this year. But are there any other players that we ought to keep an eye on?
I mean, look, I think you got to keep an eye on all of them, but a couple
Right.
of guys that stand out to me, that people that they're not paying attention to Major League Soccer might not be as aware of is Miles Robinson. I got to do Cincinnati's first game of the
Mm,
season,
yeah.
and he was the best player on the field. And remember, he was targeted to be a starter 4 years ago
Right.
when the team went to Qatar, and he tore his Achilles just months before that World Cup. And he's worked his way back. He's a designated player for Cincinnati. He's got incredible athleticism, and he's now got experience as well. I personally think he should be a lock for the national team, and I think he should be in the starting 11. We'll see. That's
Absolutely.
Potch's choice, not mine, but he's a guy to look out for. Another guy that people probably know about, but I think has really come on lately is Brendan Aronson. He's really taken a big
Yes.
step forward this season and starting to produce, scoring some goals and getting some assists. And he's a player that I think has improved his stock a lot lately.
I love that call, especially considering how the Leeds American project fell through, unfortunately. but now it seems to kind of be taking a bit of a rise a bit as they're hoping to establish themselves in the Prem. Um, so what are your impressions of Poch and his tenure so far as the coach? Obviously, we've had the ups and downs of Berhalter. We made a World Cup appearance in Qatar, like you mentioned, but it felt like a dumpster fire by the time Poch was here. What are your impressions, and do you think we've seen improvement under Poch?
I think absolutely. There was a stretch last summer where it looked like there wasn't any progress being made. It didn't look
Right,
like he was any closer to picking a starting 11 or a group of players that he really felt like he could trust. And I know people were frustrated because they wanted him to take care of that process faster than he did. But the tough part was there were no real major competitions for which he could do that
right,
because there's no qualification for the United States because they're, the host nation. So I think it took him longer because he wanted to make sure he took a look at everybody that he possibly could. And I think that once he started to do that, he started to make some decisions. I think that he also set a tone about what kind of commitment he wants from the players if they're going to be on this team, this national team. And I think that we started to really see that in the results here over the past 3 or 4 months.
hmm That's really cool. Yeah, and I would agree, especially with that 5-1 win we had the other month. That was a pretty emphatic win. Uh, with what has undoubtedly been a golden generation of U.S. talent, is this the must-win competition for the U.S. men's team before like guys like Pulisic get too old to be playing for the national team?
I think that this is the time when they need to have a good World Cup. When you say must win, I mean, I don't know exactly what that means, but I think they need to have some moments that capture the attention
Right,
of American casuals.
right,
Now, when you say like, I don't really believe necessarily in this golden generation thing. I think there's more talent coming through. We already kind of talked about that. I think
right.
there's going to be, I don't think that there's just going to be a lack of young, talented players coming out of the United States going forward. We have too many good academies now.
Mm,
There's leagues, there's teams up and running in every major market in this country, developing good talent. So I don't think it's like, oh, we got to hit this window because there's no more talent after this. I think it's got to hit
right.
this window because the World Cup is here.
Yeah.
It's on your home soil. And so Americans are going to be paying more attention than they normally would. And because of that, you got to take advantage of that audience when you have it. So, yeah, from that standpoint, I think it's a very important World Cup.
I guess what I meant by must win, to clarify, I meant like I'm thinking like the Belgian golden generation that they had with De Bruyne and Lukaku and that group that just completely blew that window to win anything for Belgium. And I guess my big fear is with this group is they're not going to be able to have that kind of run or even close to a kind of run that we were kind of hoping when guys like Pulisic entered the team. But I totally kind of get that perspective as well. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I just, first of all, I don't think this team has the same type of talent that Belgian golden generation did.
that's
But I
true.
also think that idea, we label these, people as a golden generation before they've actually earned anything. And sometimes, we overhype them a little bit. And,
That is very true.
I just think that you got to give these kids a chance to be themselves. I think you have to let them go out there and make their own destiny, but you also have to understand that they're not on their own. There's more waves of young kids coming that are going to make their mark on the national team as well.
Absolutely, and I love that perspective. We're all about perspective here on the show. A couple of questions, and I'll let you go here. I know you've been very kind to give us your time here. Um, what do you think has to be done to draw more fans here in the states to the beautiful game? We've have numbers that show that soccer viewership is way up, and like even over hockey, according to some stats. But it sure feels like the sentiment towards the game is much the same as it has been even like 10 years ago. And when talking to the average person. And what do you think that needs to happen, and why do you think that is?
Well, look, you're fighting an uphill battle with soccer in this country, and you always will be because it's not the sport that Americans invented. It's not the sport that they necessarily grew up with.
Hmm.
So, I think you're always going to be on some level fighting for relevance, fighting for people to take it seriously. And that's okay. But I do think it's clearly been growing, and I think it's going to continue to grow. The league, Major League Soccer, needs to continue to get better. You
Hmm.
have to, I think your domestic league makes a big difference, but I
Right.
think the national team's performance is the biggest factor, because I think if the national team goes and wins, America loves a winner, and if they feel like they're good at soccer, they like soccer more.
Hmm.
So I think the most important thing is for the U.S. men's national team to continue to improve and get better.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen the women go out and be consistent winners for a while now, but I can definitely see, like, do you think the women's game has to grow too? Like we're seeing, like, for example, the current, in KC are have had an incredible run, and do you think NWSL has to grow as well, or is that just a side factor? You think?
If they don't grow, they're going to get passed by all the European leagues, who are already starting to outspend them.
That's
And the
true.
U.S. has always cranked out the most soccer talent for women because of, excuse me, because of the college system.
Yeah.
And we're still cranking out more young talent. And when you look at that U.S. women's national team, they just rotate players in, and they're all great.
Hmm.
So the talent generation is great, but the professional league has to keep up, because now the rest of the world understands that there's money in women's soccer too, and they're trying. But they
Right.
didn't try for a long time at the level that we did in the United States, and so they got to keep up now.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally see that for sure. Well, Nate, thank you so much for giving us your time on this interview. Um, Tell everyone where they can find you and what's coming up for you and all that.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is that if you're willing to pre-order my book, I would really appreciate it. You can go to Amazon.com and just type in "perfect pitch soccer," and it'll come up right there. You can also buy it at NateBukaty.com, and it'll be out in late May. So yeah, check it out. That would be the best thing. And then you can see me obviously on Apple TV calling Major League Soccer games as well.
Absolutely. And thank you so much once again, Nate. This has been awesome to talk to you, and hope to maybe have you on in the future. Sound good, man?
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yep, no problem, man.
Well, folks, that's it for this episode of the Pitch Grid. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Listening on Spotify or Apple, a rating or follow goes a very long way and lets others know that you enjoy the show. We'll be back soon with more chaos, commentary, and coverage from the world of soccer and the NFL. Until next time, stay sharp, y'all.